Hello, this is Hit Pause, a podcast made in San Francisco with more questions than answers. Hello, and welcome to the second episode of Hit Pause, my new little podcast and experimentation. You may have listened to the first episode. Maybe you'll discover that the sound here is a little clearer. I'm using a different microphone today for this experimentation again. It's a Saturday afternoon here in San Francisco. It's a sunny day. The world is slowed down and has been now for, in some places, maybe a month, in some places, 3 weeks, 2 weeks. It's impossible to escape the news about the pandemic, so I'll address them a little early in this podcast, which is not dedicated to that, but what I wanted to say is that this pandemic is affecting a lot of people. Half of the planet Earth is actually now under some form of measure of stay-at-home order or shelter-in-place, social distancing. It's astonishing. It's a historical moment that maybe many of us, the majority for sure, never imagined they would end up living. And yet, when I'm thinking about all of this, I come back to the images of my grandparents who in the French Pyrenees had lived the Second World War and the deprivations of that era. And my paternal grandparents, who lived pretty much separated, because it turns out that my paternal grandfather was actually working in the secret services of the French army at the time, which I only learned after his passing. So I remember from the conversations that I had, even though as a little kid or a young teenager, they were never conversations diving down deep into the harsh times that they experienced. But I remember having a certain sense that those people, my grandparents' generation, had lived something extraordinary that we could not comprehend. And yet they went on, they moved on, they were cooking wonderful meals for the whole family, enjoying the fun of life, and maybe because of what they had experienced, they appreciated the little things. I surely hope that this is what we're going to do as well. But I think that before we all get there as society, we will go through more trials and tribulations, and I think we'll explore in this podcast and its future episodes what I mean by that. Today, this episode brings me back to Lacan as well, the psychologist, therapist, philosopher of the psyche, who had a keen interest in looking at the words we use. And what is fascinating to me is that we are talking, we're living, we're seeing images of virality, the virality of the COVID-19 virus. We're talking and learning and looking at curves daily about its progress, about the percentage of population which is infected in this country or that country. We're looking at curves and tracking every movement of the curve and the first degree derivative. Is it starting to slow down? Is the rate of climb or descent accelerating? We're behind that thinking, looking at the second degree derivative of those curves. And we are getting an education about the contagiousness of a pandemic, the contagiousness of a disease. But what I'm finding fascinating is that coming from the Silicon Valley, having seen maybe two decades ago the very first start of social media with companies that are now long gone, MySpace and Friendster, Orkut, and a few others, is how much we have forgotten that the virality of fake news, the virality of imprecise information and manipulation is also contagious. We are getting into an interesting phase where people are staying at home and watching and rewatching every movie there is about the pandemic. And for sure, the streaming companies are doing very well on that front. And a recent one, of course, that many of us will have seen, it's called Pandemic, is giving us a lesson on the coefficient R0, which is the R0, also known as R0, which is the rate at which someone is able to infect others, and how many people one unique individual is able to infect over time. And what makes me think about is how social media companies have in the Silicon Valley been built searching for a R0 to be superior to 1. And how many hours, how many dollars of engineering investment, venture capital investment were spent to build companies, some of which have now become social media empires, obviously, have been invested and spent to get to that coefficient of virality to be greater than 1. And to me, the strikings are amazing. The parallels are striking and amazing when I look at the distribution of information across social media and how fast it has been possible for ill-willing actors to spread lies, to manipulate people. And because people are unfortunately manipulable, we are impressionable as human beings. We're not machines by definitions. And therefore, we could think about applying the same containment conversation that we are being bombarded with daily on TV from the realm of healthcare and the public health to the realm of the health of the democracy. Today, we're discovering that the R0 of COVID is about 5.7. On my website, I'll be posting a link to the CDC article that publishes the results of a study, international study that continues to be worked on, of course, but 5.7 is an extremely high number. I remember seeing recently on TV that even the smallpox coefficient is lower than that. It's about 3.6. So we're looking at an extremely invasive, extremely high rate of contagiousness pandemic. And when you look at the number of people that you have as friends on Facebook, for example, it's typical, of course, for someone my age to maybe have 300 friends on there. Teenagers, millennials will enjoy 1,000, 2,000 friends. Of course, not all of them are actively engaged with anybody. Facebook consider that we all have a coefficient of about 8 to 9 people with whom we interact virally on their platform. So arguably, let's round that number to 10, the rate of transmission of false news is twice as high as the rate of infectiousness of COVID-19. And this is something to ponder because it means that the ability of ill wishers, of manipulators to take advantage of our extremely connected society is twice as powerful as this epidemic, which is crippling the world economy right now. And now, let's go to a short break to hit pause, reflect, or just continue. And welcome back to the second part of this second episode of Hit Pause. We just left each other with this astonishing fact that the virality of social media platforms is at least today twice as powerful as the COVID or not and COVID pandemic virality. As we get to know each other through the process of this podcast, and one day the responses and comments you can submit via anchor.fm and sending me your recorded messages, it is possible you will discover that I love metaphors. Some of the people that I work with, and certainly my friends, know that maybe I have a poetic mind, so I sometimes use images to illustrate a concept or force the brain to think differently about a problem, a process. It's interesting when you think about it. Maybe we're projecting. We'll discover one day, discuss the human mechanism of projection. But when you look at a situation, sometimes by thinking about it differently, by putting yourself out of your own shoes, by displacing your point of view by 1 meter to the right or 1 meter to the left, you discover a different point of view. And that's what's interesting in this situation here, that maybe we are, as a society or as an individual, given a chance to think about what happened to the world of media and information sharing of the past 20 years, really. Because I don't believe that we arrived at the state where we're at right now in 5 hours or 3 weeks or even 2 months. And the classic joke is, how do you boil a frog? Well, very slowly, by increasing the temperature in the pan very, very slowly. Otherwise, the frog will jump out of the hot water right away. What I mean by that is that the people who are in power, wanting to change a situation, when they're having the sense of time, they learn and they know that it is much easier to modify an entire situation little by little versus a radical change. And so we find ourselves today in a corpus of a relationship between the three powers of government: the judicial branch, the legislative branch, and the executive branch. That conversation is radically modified because all those branches of power and government are in fact themselves existing within the framework of a communication branch, if you will, or substrate or container that has been radically modified over the past 20, 30 years. In the next episodes of the podcast, we'll explore that and what I mean by that. But this virality of the communication flow is fundamentally affecting the response that the governments can give and are going to give to the health crisis. And if we look at social media in its entirety, we have to now admit that it is no longer purely a technology or purely a way to think about the famous large social media companies of the world, but it is in fact intrinsically ingrained in how we interact with each other through the artifice of a constant, never-ending, all-encompassing worldwide chatter by a lot of engaged parties. So with this, I will leave you for this episode, thinking about virality as applied to health, as applied to information flows, and as applied to the contagion, which is also going on in the economic sphere. Thank you. This podcast is a simple way of sharing my thoughts. It is a personal endeavor, nothing more, a way to connect. The views and opinions represented in this podcast are solely mine. They are in no way, nor should they be assumed to be shared, supported, endorsed by my employer, the sponsors of this show, Anchor.fm, where it is hosted, and all the distributors thereof. You may find more information, links, pictures, videos, documents, and more, which may have been referenced in this podcast, on my website at www.utesa.com/podcast. There, it feels so much better after saying all of this. And so, it's time to part ways, at least for now. Until next time, time to say goodnight, time to hit pause.